Welcome back. Friday afternoon. Right now, the Pentagon reportedly searching for the founder of a website under fire for publishing government secrets and potentially on the verge of releasing a huge new stash of confidential documents. The Daily Beast today reporting that Pentagon investigators are worried that Wikileaks founder Julian Assange has a cadre of secret State Department cables, which, if released, they fear would damage America's national security interests. You will recall it was Wikileaks that first published this video here of a 2007 American helicopter attack in Baghdad that killed 12 people, including 2 reporters. 22-year-old Army intelligence specialist Bradley Manning is currently in military custody for allegedly leaking the video and documents. The Daily Beast says investigators want to know what connection, if any, exists between Manning and WikiLeaks founder Assange. When the WikiLeaks story first broke, we had Mr. Assange as our guest here on the DR show, and at the time, I asked him point blank where he was getting his material.
We specialize in having whistleblowers send us this sort of information. We never speak too directly about our confidential sources. There were more than one military whistleblowers involved in releasing this material and surrounding documents.
Pentagon officials dismiss the notion that they're looking for Assange, but let us recap. In the midst of a war, a young intelligence officer releases confidential documents to a major publication, and both come under fire. It certainly has happened before, at least in some version. Nearly the same scenario unfolding in 1971 with the leak of the now infamous Pentagon Papers. U.S. military analyst Daniel Ellsberg triggered a national controversy over the public's right to know when he leaked a top-secret Pentagon study on the Vietnam War to the New York Times and other papers. And joining us now is Mr. Daniel Ellsbaerg. Mr. Ellsbaerg was also scheduled to appear in the same room as Assange last week at an event in New York. Assange ended up appearing via Skype from Australia instead. As you can see here, also with us from Washington is Philip Shannon, contributor for the Daily Beast, who wrote the story about the search for Assange today. Mr. Ellsbaerg, I'll begin with you. Do you see direct parallels between what's developing here and what you went through?
Yes, there does seem to be an immediate parallel between me and whoever leaked the video on the assault on the 19 or 20 Iraqis. Someone, and allegedly it was Bradley Manning, did feel that that deserved to be out. The Reuters, whose newspaper men were killed in the course of that, had been trying to get that through Freedom of Information Act for 2 years, as I understand it, and had been refused. I would say that whoever did it, let's say hypothetically Bradley Manning, who's been arrested for it now, showed better judgment in putting it out than the people who kept it secret from the American people and from the Iraqis.
What is your sense of disclosure of information to the American people today compared to the period of time that you lived through where there were similar issues with the perception and reality of information being withheld from the public?
Look, there's no doubt at all that enormous amounts of information that should be made public are being withheld, and that hundreds, probably thousands of people, I'm speaking now of the run-up to the Iraq War, which has a very great similarity to the lying and the secrecy that got us into Vietnam. I think if many people had recognized that their oath of office, which called on them to support the Constitution, really contradicted their promise to keep certain secrets, when those secrets concealed lies, concealed deception of the American public and getting us into a hopeless war, they should have given priority to their oath of office, and they should have put that information out to Congress and the public. They should have done what I wish I had done much earlier than I did. I've been in that position, too. I knew years before the Pentagon Papers came out that the Americans were being lied into essentially hopeless war. I'm not proud of the fact that it didn't occur to me that my oath of office, which was to support the Constitution, called on me to put that information out in, say, '64, when the war might have been avoided. But I certainly am glad that I finally became aware of what my real responsibilities were there, and I did put it out years later. the Times at that time, which published it, and the 18 other newspapers which defied President Nixon's injunctions and did put it out, we're in the position of Julian Assange now, who is putting out information, and I think very usefully, and I'm glad that he put out the video, and I congratulate him for it.
What was the conclusion at the time that you went through this as to the direct liability for you? I know that at one point you faced life imprisonment and, for that matter, the liability to the publishers. And what do you perceive to be the liability for whoever the leak may be to Assange, whether it's Mr. Manning or anybody else, and Mr. Assange himself?
I didn't understand that we don't have an Official Secrets Act in this country criminalizing the disclosure of classified information, except for certain narrow forms of information which are not involved either in the Pentagon Papers or in these cases. Communications intelligence, nuclear weapons data, the identities of covert agents like Valerie Plame, who was disclosed by the White House. Those things are subject to law. The classification system as a whole is an administrative system that doesn't have legal force in this country. We're almost alone among countries in that. I didn't know that at the time. I assumed I must be breaking some law, that we had some equivalent. And so I didn't know, to start with, that I was the first person ever prosecuted for a leak. The first person to have the Espionage Act provisions used not for espionage, but for revealing information to the American public. Now, there have only been a couple people who've been indicted since then. Samuel Loring Morrison, 10 years later, the AIPAC informants, and Larry Franklin under George W. Bush. The only cases, and the only conviction was for Morrison. President Obama, who came in promising transparency in government and an end to the excessive secrecy, has totally violated that pledge. And it so happens that he's not only brought 2 indictments, more than any other president for leaking before any other president had done, but with now with Bradley Manning under arrest, and if he's under prosecution, that'll be 3, a new record for President Obama. That's really not the kind of change I voted for when I voted for him.
Philip, what is your understanding of where Mr. Assange is right now and how highly desired he is as a target of either State Department or Pentagon investigators?
Well, we in the press corps would sure like to know where he is. We really have no idea. He was supposed to appear this evening at a panel in Las Vegas, a meeting of investigative reporters and editors, but he apparently canceled on them at the last minute. He was supposed to appear in New York last week at a separate conference you made reference to. He chose not to attend and was apparently in his native Australia and participated.
But his absence is one thing. An understanding of the degree of interest from the federal government is another. Do you have a sense on whether his absence correlates to avoiding the American authorities in any way? Yeah, he said last week at this New York gathering that he had been instructed by his lawyers not to return to the United States.
Right. You know, may I say the expression he used, I was supposed to do a dialogue with him at that conference. That's why I went to New York. And the explanation he used was that he was understood that it was not safe for him to come to this country. He left it, and then later he explained now, when the Bradley Manning arrest was announced, he said, now you understand why I didn't come. I think it's worth mentioning a very new and ominous development in our country. I think he would not be safe even physically entirely, wherever he is. We have, after all, for the first time that I ever, perhaps in any democratic country, we have a president who has announced that he feels he has the right to use special operations operatives against anyone abroad that he thinks is associated with terrorism, that he suspects of it. And that includes American citizens. One American citizen has even been named. Now, Assange is not an American citizen, but I listened to that with a special interest because I was, in fact, the subject of a White House hit squad in November on May 3rd, 1972. A dozen Cuban assets were brought up from Miami with orders, quote, quoting their prosecutor, to incapacitate Daniel Ellsberg totally on the steps of the Capitol, it so happens, when I was in a rally during the Vietnam War. And I asked the prosecutor, what does that mean? Kill me? And he said, the words were to incapacitate you totally, but you should understand these guys, meaning these CIA operatives, never used the word kill. And he thought the intent was to kill me. I actually think it was to silence me at that particular time for worries they had that I would leak President Nixon's nuclear threats, which he was making at that precise time in 1972. Now, as I look at Assange's case, their worry that he will reveal current threats, I would have to say, puts his well-being, his physical life, in some danger now. And I say that with anguish. I think it's astonishing that an American president should have put out that policy, and that he's not getting any resistance from it, from Congress, the press, the courts, or anything. It's an amazing development, but I think Assange would do well to keep his whereabouts unknown.
Yeah, Mr. Ellsberg, I have to say it is a true pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you and hear you. We acknowledge the obvious disturbance in the shift in this country as you just described it, and I give you my word that as a journalist in this country, I will do everything in my power to at least shine the light as to what is going on here. Philip, a pleasure. Thank you for your coverage on this and your insight. Mr. Ellsberg, we do hope to talk to you again soon.
And I appreciate what you've said. I love hearing it, and good luck to you.
All right, listen, thank you so much.